In a forgotten corner of the world, where green hills surrendered to the gray mist of the coast, a life was ending. It was ending not with a bang, but with a slow, muddy surrender. His name had once been Titan, a name spoken with respect, a name that meant power and fire and a thundering of hooves that could shake the very earth. But now, he was just the old bull. He lay in a hollow of mud and straw, a mountain of once mighty muscle collapsing in on itself. His hide, the color of polished mahogany in his prime, was now a dull, cracked map of rain and sorrow. His breath came in shallow, ragged sighs, each one a small puff of steam dissolving into the cold air, a ghost of the life that was leaving him. The veterinarian had been clear. It was a kindness, he'd said, to let him go, a mercy. But the farmer, a man named Silas, whose hands were as calloused as his heart, couldn't bring himself to do it. Not out of love, but out of a kind of weary inertia. So Titan was left to wait for the end in his lonely pen, a monument of decay, ignored by the busy rhythms of the farm. And then he came, a boy. His name was Leo, and he lived in a world as quiet as the bull's was desolate. Leo was born into a world of cotton-stuffed silence, a world where laughter was only a vibration in the floorboards, and a mother's lullaby was just the gentle pressure of her breath against his cheek. He was 10 years old, with eyes that saw everything, because they had to. They saw the flicker of frustration in his teacher's face. They saw the pity in the eyes of other children. And from the window of his small house across the field, they saw the great, forgotten bull. He saw not a beast, not a failed asset, but a loneliness that mirrored his own. So, one afternoon, against every warning, against all logic, he slipped out of his house and walked toward the fence that separated his silent world from the bull's dying one. He was just a small boy in a red jacket, a fragile whisper of a thing, about to step into an arena of profound and ancient despair. What could a boy who couldn't speak offer a creature that couldn't rise? What happens when a silent heart reaches out to a dying one? The answer wasn't just a miracle. It was a lesson in how the most broken things in this world can sometimes be the only ones that know how to put each other back together. The air around the pen was thick with the scent of damp earth and defeat. To anyone else, it was the smell of decay. To Leo, who experienced the world through senses other than sound, it was a heavy blanket, a tangible presence of sadness. He stood at the fence, his small fingers curling around the cold, rusted wire. The bull, Titan, lay with his massive head turned away, a statue of resignation. Silas, the farmer, saw the boy from the barn doorway and let out a gruff sigh, wiping grease from his hands onto an already stained rag. He'd seen the boy watching before. "Best stay away from there, son," he called out, his voice a gravelly rumble that Leo couldn't hear, but could feel as a faint vibration through the soles of his worn sneakers. Leo's mother, Elena, stood on their porch, her arms wrapped around herself. She saw the scene, and her heart clenched with a familiar mix of fear and a fierce, protective love. She knew that fence was a boundary not just between a boy and a bull, but between her son's fragile world and the harsh realities that could so easily break him. She watched, her breath held, trusting the deep, quiet wisdom she knew existed within her silent child. Leo didn't look back. His gaze was fixed on the mountain of brown hide. He saw a slight tremor run through the bull's flank, a shiver of cold or pain, he wasn't sure, but it was a sign of life. It was enough. He unlatched the simple wire loop holding the gate and slipped inside. The squelch of his boots in the mud was the only sound. Silas took a half step forward, ready to yell, to pull the boy out of there. An animal that size, even dying, was unpredictable. But something stopped him. The boy wasn't walking with the boisterous, naive confidence of a child approaching a pet. He moved with a kind of reverence, a slow, deliberate grace, as if entering a sacred space. Titan's one visible eye, a dark, liquid pool of ancient pain, swiveled slowly, focusing on the small, approaching shape. There was no aggression in it, only a profound, bottomless weariness. Leo stopped a few feet away, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He could feel its rhythm pulsing in his ears. one of the few internal sounds his world allowed him. He took another step, then another, until he was kneeling in the mud beside the bull's enormous head. He reached out a trembling hand, not to the horns or the powerful skull, but to the soft, velvety patch of skin just below Titan's ear. His fingers made contact. The bull's skin was cold, but beneath it, Leo felt a faint, deep warmth, a flickering ember. At the touch, Titan didn't flinch. He didn't move at all for a long moment. Then, he let out a long, slow breath, a sigh so deep it seemed to carry the weight of a lifetime of sun and storms. And for the first time in weeks, the ear closest to Leo's hand gave a soft, gentle twitch. It was a tiny movement, almost imperceptible, but in the quiet world of the boy and the bull, it was a roar. It was a conversation starting. From the barn, Silas watched, his cynical frown faltering for just a second. From the porch, Elena let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. The connection had been made. That first touch became a ritual. Every day after school, Leo would cross the field, his red jacket a bright beacon against the muted landscape. He didn't just bring himself anymore. In a small bucket, he'd carry fresh water, sloshing it carefully with each step. He'd find the softest blades of grass at the edge of the pasture, the ones the other cattle ignored, and present them to Titan, laying them gently near his mouth. At first, the bull ignored the offerings. But Leo was patient. His life had been a masterclass in patience, in waiting for the world to meet him on his own terms. He would sit for hours, his back against the bull's vast, unmoving side, the sheer scale of the creature a comfort. In his world of silence, the solid living presence of the bull was an anchor. It was real. It was there. He would talk to Titan, but not with his voice. He would use his hands, the graceful, expressive language of sign that was his native tongue. His fingers would dance in the air, weaving stories of his day at school, of the frustration of seeing mouths move but understanding nothing, of the loneliness that sometimes felt as vast and heavy as the sky. He told the bull about the colors of the sunset, describing the orange and purple streaks with frantic, beautiful gestures. He told him about the feel of his mother's hug, a pressure that meant safety and love. He poured out all the words that were trapped inside him, the torrent of thoughts and feelings that had no other outlet, and the bull would listen, or at least, he was present. His stillness was a form of listening, a kind of deep, quiet acceptance that Leo had never found among the hearing. The other children at school were a flurry of noise and motion he couldn't penetrate. Adults often spoke to him too loudly, with exaggerated mouths, their kindness a form of shouting that only amplified his otherness. But Titan demanded nothing. He just absorbed the boy's silent confessions, his rhythmic presence, a steady bass note in Leo's quiet life. One afternoon, as Leo was signing the story of a dream he'd had, a dream of flying over the fields, he rested his palm flat against the bull's ribs, and for the first time he felt it. A low, deep rumble that started somewhere in the animal's core and vibrated up through his own arm. It wasn't a groan of pain. It was something else, a resonance, a pre-verbal sound of acknowledgement. It was the bull's first word. Leo's eyes went wide. He pressed his cheek against the coarse, muddy hide, feeling the vibration hum through his own bones. In that moment, the barrier of species, of size, of silence, dissolved completely. For a boy who could not hear, and a bull who could not rise, they had found a language all their own. It was a language of touch, of presence, of shared vibration. It was the language of two souls who had been discarded by the world, finding refuge in one another. The sky had been a bruised purple all afternoon, the clouds gathering in heavy, ominous silence. A storm was coming. Not just a spring shower, but a real coastal tempest, the kind that rattled windows and sent animals running for cover. Silas, the farmer, worked with a grim urgency, securing latches and checking the roof on the main barn. He glanced over at the muddy pen where the old bull lay, a dark shape in the fading light. A cold knot of certainty tightened in his gut. An animal that weak, exposed to the driving rain and the biting wind, he wouldn't make it through the night. It would be a harsh end, but perhaps Silas thought with a familiar weariness. It was for the best. It would be over. From her kitchen window, Elena watched the same sky with a different kind of dread. She saw Leo pull on his yellow rain slicker, his face set with a look of fierce determination she knew all too well. "Leo, honey, you can't," she signed, her hands quick and sharp with worry. "The storm is too big. It's not safe." Leo looked at her, his eyes pleading. He signed back, his small hands a blur. "He'll be alone. He'll be scared." Her heart broke. How could she explain the finality of nature, the cruel calculus of survival, to a boy whose entire being was now wrapped up in this one impossible hope? But as she looked at him, she saw more than a child's stubbornness. She saw a loyalty so pure it felt sacred. She let her hands drop and gave a slow, reluctant nod. Leo grabbed a small, worn blue tarp from the shed and ran out into the wind, the yellow of his coat a slash of defiance against the darkening world. The first drops of rain, cold and heavy, began to fall as he reached the pen. The wind was a physical force now, whipping his hood from his head and plastering his hair to his forehead. Titan hadn't moved. He seemed to have sunk even deeper into the mud, a vessel taking on water, preparing to go under. Leo struggled with the tarp, the wind snatching it from his grasp, trying to tear it away. It was a battle, the small boy versus the might of the storm. He fought with a desperate strength, finally managing to anchor one corner under a fence post, then another. He pulled the flapping fabric over a small section of Titan's back, a ridiculously small patch of shelter against the elements. It wouldn't keep him dry. It wouldn't keep him warm. But it was everything Leo had to give. The rain came down in sheets, a deafening roar that Leo couldn't hear but could feel as a relentless, percussive assault on the ground around him. He didn't seek shelter for himself. He huddled down beside Titan's massive head, pressing himself against the bull, trying to shield the great creature's face with his own small body. He was soaked through in seconds, shivering. But he didn't move. He laid his head on Titan's neck, a silent, steadfast presence in the heart of the gale. Hours passed. The storm raged. From his window, Silas watched the small, unmoving yellow shape in the distance, a lump in his throat he couldn't swallow. It was the stupidest, most pointless thing he had ever seen. And yet, he couldn't look away. Sometime deep in the night, in the heart of the tempest, Titan did something he hadn't done in a month. He moved. With a great shuddering effort that seemed to draw on some long-forgotten reserve of strength, he lifted his heavy head from the mud. He turned it slowly, painfully, until his warm, wet breath ghosted across Leo's cheek. He rested his head back down, closer to the boy this time, a silent gesture of solidarity. They were in it together. The storm had come to claim a life, but in its fury, it had forged a bond that was stronger than the wind and more resilient than the rain. The morning after the storm broke clear and dazzling. The world washed clean. The air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. Silas was the first one out, his boots sinking into the soft ground as he walked toward the pen, his heart heavy with a grim expectation. He was preparing himself for what he would find, for the conversation he would have to have with the small, quiet boy from across the field. He reached the fence and stopped dead. The scene before him didn't make sense. The small blue tarp was a tattered flag tangled in the wire. The boy, Leo, was still there, fast asleep, his yellow slicker caked in mud, his small body curled against the bull's side. But it was the bull that stole Silas's breath. Titan was not dead. He was different. His head was up, his eyes were open, and they were clear, the profound weariness replaced by a calm, quiet alertness. As Silas watched, the bull extended his long, raspy tongue and gave the sleeping boy's muddy jacket a slow, deliberate lick. It was a gesture of such startling tenderness, so at odds with the creature's immense size and fearsome reputation, that Silas felt a crack form in the hard shell of his cynicism. From that day on, the healing was no longer a secret hope. It was a visible fact. Titan began to eat. He no longer ignored the soft grass Leo brought him, but took it from the boy's hand with surprising gentleness. He drank the fresh water from the bucket, his great neck arching with a strength that hadn't been there before. The dullness of his coat began to recede, replaced by a faint, returning luster, like a piece of old wood slowly being polished back to life. Silas found himself making excuses to be near the pen, pretending to mend the fence or check the water trough. He'd watch from the corner of his eye as Leo went about his daily ritual. He saw the way the boy's hands moved, telling his silent stories. He saw the way the bull would track the boy's movements with his eyes, his ears twitching, as if he understood every gesture. He began to see it not as a boy playing near an animal, but as a conversation, a real one. Have you ever felt a connection so deep, so fundamental, that it didn't need words to be understood? A bond that exists in the space between breaths, in a shared glance, in a simple, quiet presence. It's a rare and powerful thing, a language spoken not by the tongue, but by the soul. It was the language Silas was now witnessing, and it confounded all his practical, worldly knowledge. One afternoon, he saw Leo laughing. The boy wasn't making a sound, but his whole body was shaking with silent mirth. Titan had nudged the empty water bucket with his nose, sending it rolling in the mud. Leo had rolled it back with his foot, and the bull nudged it again. They were playing. A 10-year-old deaf boy and a 1,000-pound dying bull were playing a game. Silas leaned against the barn wall, the rough wood pressing into his back, and felt a smile tug at the corners of his mouth, a genuine smile, the kind he hadn't felt in years. The miracle wasn't just happening in the pen, it was happening in him, too. He was starting to believe in the impossible. The path to healing is never a straight line. There are triumphs, and then there are terrifying steps backward. The great hope that had bloomed in the muddy pen was about to face its harshest test. It had been a week since the storm. Titan's progress had been slow but steady, a daily accumulation of small victories. He was eating well, his eyes were bright, and the deep, resonant rumble in his chest had become a familiar response to Leo's touch. The next logical step, the one Leo dreamed of every night, was for Titan to stand, to rise from the mud, and reclaim his place in the world of the living. The boy arrived one afternoon, his heart buoyant with this hope. He had a new offering, a crisp red apple, a special treat saved from his own lunch. He presented it to Titan, who sniffed it with interest. "You have to get up to get it," Leo signed, a playful but determined look on his face. He held the apple just out of reach, an incentive, a challenge. He knelt beside his friend, one hand on the bull's massive shoulder, and whispered his silent encouragement. "You can do it. You are strong. Get up, Titan, please." And then, as if in direct answer to the boy's plea, it happened. A tremor ran through the bull's body. He bunched the dormant muscles in his hindquarters. His back legs trembled with a colossal effort. With a low groan that vibrated through the very ground, he pushed. He was trying to rise. Leo's heart soared. This was it, the moment. But the strength wasn't there yet. His hind legs, atrophied from weeks of disuse, gave way. The front half of his body rose a few feet, a magnificent, heroic effort, before his forelegs buckled under the immense weight. Titan collapsed back into the mud with a heavy, sickening thud that shook the pen. The sound was followed by a terrible, defeated silence. Leo stared, his face frozen in horror. The hope that had filled him seconds before shattered into a million pieces. He had pushed him, he had hurt him. He saw a flicker of pain in the bull's eyes, a return of the old deep despair. And in that moment, Leo felt a crushing wave of failure. He had been so sure. He had believed with all his being, and he had been wrong. The world was right after all. The bull was too far gone. The miracle was a fantasy. Tears, hot and silent, streamed down his face, blurring the image of his fallen friend. He scrambled backward, away from the bull, away from his failure, and ran. He ran from the pen, past the barn where Silas watched with a pained expression, and didn't stop until he burst through the door of his own home and into his mother's arms, his small body racked with silent, heartbreaking sobs. The dream, it seemed, was over. That night, Leo's world felt darker and quieter than ever before. He refused to eat. He lay in his bed, facing the wall, the image of Titan's collapse replaying in his mind. He had failed. His mother, Elena, sat on the edge of his bed, her hand resting gently on his back. She didn't try to offer empty reassurances. She knew the shape of his grief was too large for simple words. Instead, she just stayed with him, her presence a steady, loving anchor in his sea of despair. She waited. The next morning, Leo didn't get up. He didn't get dressed for school. He just lay there, a small, still form under the covers. Elena brought him his breakfast, but he shook his head. She looked at her son, at the profound defeat in his posture, and knew this was a turning point far more significant than a bull rising or falling. This was about her son's spirit. She sat down and began to sign, her movements slow and deliberate, full of a gentle gravity. Leo, love isn't about succeeding. It's about showing up. It's about staying, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Titan doesn't need you to be a miracle worker. He just needs his friend. Leo didn't respond for a long time. The silence in the room was heavy with unspoken doubt, but her words, like seeds, had been planted. He thought of the storm, of huddling together in the wind and the rain. He hadn't fixed anything then. He had just been there. He thought of all the afternoons spent telling his silent stories, not to make the bull better, but just to have someone to tell them to. Maybe his mother was right. Maybe the point wasn't the victory. Maybe the point was the love itself. Slowly, he pushed back the covers. He got dressed. He didn't go to school. He walked out the door and across the field, his steps lacking their usual bounce, heavy with a fragile new kind of resolve. He reached the pen. Titan was in the same spot, unmoving. The apple lay half buried in the mud nearby. Leo didn't try to coax him. He didn't offer any food. He just slipped inside the gate, walked over to his friend, and sat down in the mud beside him. He rested his head against the bull's side and closed his eyes. He didn't sign. He didn't ask for anything. He just sat, and he began to hum. It was a low, tuneless sound that he couldn't hear but could feel deep in his own chest, a vibration of pure, unconditional presence. He hummed for an hour, maybe more. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and then something shifted. A deep shudder went through the bull's frame. Slowly, deliberately, with an immense and sacred effort, Titan planted his front hooves firmly in the earth. He pushed. His muscles, corded and trembling, strained against the pull of gravity. He drove his back legs under him, finding his footing in the soft ground. With a groaning, guttural bellow that was not a sound of pain but of monumental, triumphant effort, Goliath rose. He stood. He was unsteady, his legs trembling like newborn saplings. But he was on all 4 feet. He stood, a mountain of resilience, silhouetted against the bright blue sky. Silas, who had been watching from the barn, dropped the harness he was holding. His jaw hung open. Leo opened his tear-filled eyes and looked up and up and up at the full, magnificent height of his friend, standing tall and alive. The miracle was real. The news of the rising of Titan spread through the small farming community like wildfire. It started as a whisper, a piece of gossip shared over a fence post, then grew into a local legend. The miracle bull and the silent boy. People would slow their cars as they drove past Silas's farm, hoping to catch a glimpse of the impossible pair. And what they saw was more heartwarming than any story could convey. Titan was no longer confined to his muddy pen. Silas had opened the gate, allowing him access to a small, lush pasture of his own. And wherever Leo went, Titan followed. He was like a giant, horned shadow, his movements slow and deliberate but always oriented toward the small boy in the red jacket. He would wait patiently at the fence when Leo was at school, his great head lifted, watching the road. When Leo returned, Titan would greet him with a low, happy rumble, nuzzling his head against the boy's shoulder with a gentleness that defied his size. Their bond transformed not just the bull, but the boy. The loneliness that had clung to Leo like a shroud began to dissipate, burned away by the warmth of this extraordinary friendship. He had been seen, he had been heard, in the only way that mattered. And this newfound confidence began to bubble up inside him, Seeking a new outlet, he started to experiment with his own voice. At first, it was in imitation of his friend. He would press his cheek against Titan's chest, feeling the deep, vibrating rumble, and try to replicate it in his own throat. He would produce low, guttural hums, feeling the vibration on his own vocal cords, a novel and fascinating sensation. He was discovering sound from the inside out. Elena would watch, her heart aching with a fierce, hopeful joy. She would see him in the pasture, his face inches from the bulls, his mouth forming shapes, making small, tentative sounds. Moo, he would try, his version a soft, breathy "ooh." Titan would respond with his own deep rumble, as if in encouragement. It was a conversation of a different sort now, a bridge being built between the world of silence and the world of sound. He was finding his voice, not because he was being forced to in a sterile classroom, but because he had something he desperately wanted to say. He wanted to speak the name of his friend. He would practice it, Titan, breaking the word into feelings of air and vibration. His progress was slow, filled with the frustration and stumbles of any difficult journey. But for the first time, the silence was not a wall, but simply a starting point. He had been given a voice, not through his ears, but through his heart. And soon, he would need to use it to save his friend one last time. The world has a way of intruding upon miracles. Its rules and regulations, its cold logic, often have no room for things born of love and impossibility. A letter arrived one day, official and impersonal. It was from the county agricultural department. A routine inspection had noted the presence of an unregistered, aged bull on the property. Due to health regulations and liability concerns, the animal was deemed unfit and would have to be humanely euthanized within 30 days. The word humane felt like a cruel joke. Silas read the letter, his hands, usually so steady, trembling with rage. After everything. After witnessing the impossible. After watching that boy pour his entire soul into saving that creature, some faceless bureaucrat in an office miles away was going to end it all with the stroke of a pen. It was a death sentence, delivered by mail. That evening, the air was thick with a tension that even Leo could feel. He saw the grim set of Silas's jaw, the worried lines around his mother's eyes. Elena sat him down and explained the letter, her hands moving with a heavy, somber grace. She didn't soften the blow. Leo deserved the truth. As he understood the words, put down, take away, end, his face paled. The joy that had so recently lit up his features was extinguished, replaced by a fierce, protective terror. No. They couldn't. Titan wasn't just a bull. He was his friend. He was part of him. The next week was a blur of frantic phone calls by Silas, and anxious, sleepless nights for Elena. The answer was always the same. The rules were the rules. The bull was too old, a potential risk. The appeal was denied. The date was set. A man from the county, a Mr. Henderson, would arrive in 2 days to oversee the procedure. Despair settled over the farm like a physical fog. It felt like the end. The final battle had arrived, and it wasn't a storm they could weather or a sickness they could heal. It was a clipboard and a signature. On the morning Henderson was due to arrive, Leo woke up with a terrifying calm. He knew what he had to do. He couldn't fight them with phone calls or arguments he couldn't make. He had to fight them with the one thing that was undeniably real, his bond with Titan. When the county truck pulled up, Leo was waiting. He wasn't in the house. He was standing in the middle of the pasture, directly in the path, his hand resting on Titan's broad, powerful head. The bull stood calmly beside him, a living mountain of loyalty. Mr. Henderson, a man with a tired face and a clipboard, got out of his truck, followed by Silas. "Son, you need to move," Henderson said, his voice firm but not unkind. Leo stood his ground. He looked from the man to Silas, his eyes burning with an intensity that made both men falter. He took a deep breath. He opened his mouth. He had been practicing one word, over and over, whispering it into Titan's ear. He focused all his love, all his desperation, all his hope into this single, monumental effort. And, For the first time, clear and strong and ringing with undeniable power, Leo spoke. "Home," he said. The word was not perfect. It was rough around the edges. But it was unmistakable. He is home. The sound of Leo's voice hung in the air, stunning the two men into silence. It was not just the clarity of the words, but the profound, unshakable conviction behind them. Mr. Henderson looked from the small, determined boy to the massive, gentle bull standing placidly at his side. He saw not a liability, not a risk, but a protector. And he saw a boy who had, against all odds, found his voice to defend his friend. The clipboard in Henderson's hand suddenly felt flimsy, the regulations printed on it cheap and meaningless in the face of what he was witnessing. Silas stepped forward, his own voice thick with emotion. "The boy is right," he said, standing beside Leo, placing a hand on his shoulder. "This bull isn't going anywhere. He's family. We'll sign whatever waivers you need. We'll take full responsibility. But he stays." Henderson looked at the scene for a long moment, the boy with his hand on the bull, the farmer with his hand on the boy. It was a portrait of a strange, beautiful, and fiercely loyal family. He let out a long sigh, the sigh of a man whose job had worn down his soul, but not quite extinguished it. He clicked his pen, but instead of checking a box, he scribbled a note in the margin of his form. "Situation resolved. Animal poses no threat. Under constant, careful supervision." He tore the sheet from the clipboard and handed it to Silas. "You'll have to get him properly registered as a companion animal," he said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "But for today, I think my work here is done." And with that, he turned, got back in his truck, and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust and a miracle in his wake. As the truck disappeared down the road, Leo finally let out the breath he was holding. He buried his face in Titan's warm, coarse hide, tears of relief streaming down his cheeks. Titan rumbled, a deep, comforting vibration, and nudged him gently with his head. The battle was over. Love had won. From that day forward, the farm was a different place. It was a place of pilgrimage for some, a place of quiet wonder for all. The story of Leo and Titan became a modern parable, a reminder that the most powerful force on earth is a connection that refuses to be broken. Leo's voice, once unlocked, continued to blossom. He started talking more, hesitantly at first, then with a growing confidence. He learned to laugh out loud, a joyful, uninhibited sound that often mingled with the deep, happy rumbles of his best friend. They would spend their afternoons in the sun-drenched pasture, two souls who had once been lost in their own lonely worlds. One had been dying in the mud, frail and forgotten. The other had been trapped in a fortress of silence. But in reaching for each other, they had found more than just healing. The boy who could not hear taught the world to listen with its heart. And the bull who was meant to die taught a small, quiet boy that every living thing has a voice, if you are only patient and loving enough to hear it. They were a living testament to the truth that sometimes the most profound rescues don't involve saving someone from danger, but simply saving them from being alone.